Okay, good afternoon. So, because you were talking about PMUs, so maybe that's where I will start. Okay, so this is how do we secure PMU messages? What are various ways we can use to secure a PMU message? Okay, and again, the idea is that they obviously transmit the data to a pager data concentration, and we want those security principles we have already talked about: confidentiality, integrity, authentication, and availability. Okay, so there are various ways we can do this. One is obviously setting up a secure communication channel, okay, which we know. And by the way, I'll try to demonstrate the TLS. I have written the program. I'll show you later on, how the transport layer security works. Or you can set up a VPN. Okay, we will talk about VPN also, and if possible, we will try to demonstrate how you can set up a VPN. Okay, so you can establish a secure TCP/IP channel using transport layer security, which we have talked about. So obviously, it needs the keys now, right? Or you can set up a VPN, and there are different types of VPNs that you can set up. We will talk about that. For example, you can have a IPsec, IP level security, right? So you remember the different layers, IP, TCP. So at each level, you can have a security setup, right? So that's you know about the standard. Dr. Walza talked about that yesterday. So they do not have inherently any kind of security or encryption built into it. Okay, so as a result, majority of the PMUs don't have any security built into them. There's nothing. They do follow this standard, but there is no security. So you have to set up your own security. Okay. Now, you can add digital signatures, and again, we know about that already, or you can add hash-based message authentication code. Okay, so hashing you can do. That's a lower level of security, but still better than nothing. You can do that. Okay, so digital signature. So obviously, you have to set up your public key infrastructure. Okay, another one is using the certificates, right? Mutual authentication. So all those methods we talked about, different ways, you can actually include it in the PMU. Okay, so PMU and PDC will authenticate each other, right? So using the pre-shared keys, right? Or they will do the handshake and then encrypt the data using the pre-shared keys, right? So we did talk about that also. Another one is, again, better than nothing is the time stamp validation, right? So because the data is time sensitive, it's obviously, you know, um, to ensure accurate and secure. So we use GPS or this IEEE 1588 standard for synchronization. Okay, so you can validate timestamp freshness to avoid the replay attack at least, right? Unless the, as you were discussing, unless the attacker is very sophisticated and they are able to even change the timestamp. Okay, but at least if it is a replay attack, hopefully they're dumb enough that they are replaying this old message again and again, and timestamp is also old. So you can then verify that timestamp hasn't changed, right? So at least something. So remember, you have to remember one thing. This is a defense in depth principle. Okay, there is no single um, there is no single method or no single action, security action, that's going to make you 100% secure. You have to take multiple actions. You have to do those, right? So this could be one of the actions. Okay, it may not provide you 100% security. Okay, actually nothing provides you 100% security. Okay, you are trying to make things difficult for the attacker and also trying to identify, whether attack has happened. So this is one example of that. Okay, if a replay happens, attack happens, and the attacker is not smart, they didn't change the timestamp, you can use that there is a replay attack, right? So this is just an example of that. And then obviously firewalling and access control. You can implement byte listing to PDC. Okay, and we will talk more about that in when we talk about IC 62443 standard. Okay, so you can have the PDC to only accept the signals or the data from known PMQs. Okay, and it could be right. So you could have firewalls and network access control lists. That's again may not give you 100% security, but will give you some security, right? And then another one is encryption at rest. Okay, because PMU data, it stores temporarily or in the PDC also, it data is stored. So obviously then you should do the encryption for that data. So both data in transit as well as data at rest should be protected. Okay. And then there is another one that you can use is for replay protection is the sequence numbers. Okay, or timestamps we already talked about. Okay, so just a quick thing I thought, because you were talking about the PMUs, I thought I better give you some idea how to secure the data. So what technology you will use? The standard is obviously plus the TLC, TLS that we talked about. Okay, IC, we talked about this standard. Okay, so that's how you can secure that. And then OpenPDC, synchrophaser software. Okay, you can add secure extensions to that. Okay, and then secure credential management system if you are integrating into the smart grid infrastructure, because those type of management systems are now available on there. Okay, just a quick overview of what you can do with your PMU message. Okay, any questions on that? Because I'm going to move on to the next 62443 standard after that. Okay, I think technologies you are already familiar. We had already talked about some of these technologies, right? Okay. Okay. So I need help now. Where is my directory? Okay, yeah, perfect. You got it. No, November 26. I'll do it. Yeah. There we go. I can do the. So now I want to use this. It's good. Yeah. Okay, let's. Okay. Let's talk about the solutions for automated substations. So this is beyond what we have already talked about. Okay, the TLS and the keys and digital signatures and digital certificates. These are some of the strategies that you can use in the power. So this is actually, although the title says automated substation, but it's actually for the entire power system. Okay, you can use all these strategies that we are going to talk about from and and later on I'll give you some very concrete examples also, for various architectures. Okay, but let's first try to understand the one I want to, emphasize. I'm You're going to get a copy of this. I'm not going to go through every single one because otherwise I'll be here forever. Okay, I want to give you, some basic ideas, and especially about, let's just, so there are, so this one and this one and this one, module 4, 5, 6, I will concentrate on. Okay, so let me just go to, so this is really understanding the threats and vulnerability, which is equally important. Anytime you are trying to set up a solution, first you need to understand what is the threat. Okay, so identifying the specific cyber threats is important. Okay, and then you need to analyze the vulnerabilities in all your equipment, IDs, substation automation system, and so on. If we get time, we will talk about auditing. I think I may skip the intrusion detection system, but auditing, I think, for you will be important. Or to, even audit your system, how good it is for, withstanding cybersecurity, right? So these are actually various types of attackers. Okay, there are nation states, which are state sponsored attackers. Those are very sophisticated actually. Okay, so sophisticated, they are well resourced. Okay, they are basically trying to disrupt something or gain a strategic advantage. I tell you, Canadian um, websites have been regularly attacked. Okay, we know about, because I'm obviously from Canada, I know about I'm sure almost every countries, you know, and other nations, states are trying to gain advantage, strategic advantage. It may be intellectual property, it may be technology, it may be, some of those things, right? Even knowing the secrets, right? So that's one. The other one is cyber criminals, which are mainly motivated by the financial gain. And they will use ransomware majority of the time. And there have been so many cases where they use ransomware. And right. And then there are terrorists who want to make some type of political statements, or, they have that purpose, right? And believe it or not, insider threats, that's actually quite a bit. The employees or contractors who have a knowledge and the access, and somehow they become disgruntled. And actually, for them, it's very, very easy to do this kind of thing, right? Because they have the access, they have the knowledge about your system, they can do that, right? And then what we call script kiddies, okay? Those are basically less sophisticated, they exploit the known unpatched vulnerabilities. They are not really, they are not very sophisticated criminals. They, for example, the unpatched vulnerabilities are known. You know what one, and if you didn't patch it, right? So obviously then it's open for criminals, right? So those are again the common, actors and threats, and obviously we have to protect against all these, right? Not only one. Okay. So what is generally the issues? Okay, we can default credentials. We talked about passwords 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are again default passwords for many of the devices, or they have a weak password. Okay, and if we get time, we will talk about intrusion detection system, and there are ways of, if you have a weak password, right, and even what we call dictionary passwords, the passwords which are very common, dictionary type passwords, right? For example, you may give the address of your house as a password, right? So those are again very easy to crack. Okay, when so it did not take much. We have done that work. It did not take much to crack a password of an IED. We were able to do it within few hours. Okay, you continuously, and if you don't have the intrusion detection system, you can't even detect it that somebody is trying to hack into your ID and trying to figure out a password for that, right? Unpatched firmware and software, right? And this is where utilities most of the time are very lazy, and for various reasons. So they are afraid that if they change the firmware, they may fix the problem, this problem, but some other problem will happen. They don't want to change it, right? Insecure protocols, okay, lack of authentication, which many are insecure, inherently insecure. We talked about IEC 61850, which is inherently insecure, C37.118, inherently insecure, until unless you add on top of it some authentication and encryption and so on, those protocols are insecure, right? And insecure remote control mechanism, that's another thing, right? And this is again lack of secure boot firmware integrity checks. Okay, majority of the IEDs don't have that now. Okay, so every time you turn your IED on or any device on, it should actually check, right, the firmware integrity, whether the firmware or the operating system is secure or not, right? Now, with the uh, some softwares are available, obviously, especially for main operating system, for example, Microsoft's operating system and so on, where, every time you boot, you can run that check. Okay. But do IDs do that? I don't think so. They don't do that, right? And then there is physical access vulnerabilities, unsecured ports. This is one of the big problems. Okay. Until and unless you do an audit, you don't know which ones are open ports that you have in your system. Okay, and open ports are the ones that will attract cyber criminals, and it's very easy to get into the system through open ports, right? Because there is no control there. Okay, so this is again some of the mechanism through which, right? So then there are others. There are so many, that the landscape is basically, um, uh, your footprint for attackers is becoming huge. Every time you add anything digital into the system, it increases the footprint for the hacker to attack. Okay. Flat network architecture, this is what we will talk about. Okay, there is no network segmentation. Okay, so you basically divide, and then once they get into, if you have a flat network, it's just one place they want to get into, and then they can go anywhere within your network if you have a flat architecture, right? Wireless communication is another one, unsecured. Okay, engineering workstations, HMI. Okay, Windows based, which obviously, there are so many attacks on Windows based operating system, and obviously then you are vulnerable if that's the operating system you are using, right? Um, and I can tell you, some of the companies in the past were very sophisticated. Actually, the very first job I did after my PhD was in a company where we had our own programming language, own operating system. So there was no way, nobody knew, outside. The programming language was called Protel, right? So, sometimes that's what happens. Then, then obviously you are not exposed that much, right? So IDS, intrusion detection system, I'm not sure how many companies really have that. Okay, but there are now packages that you can set up, right? So, right, misconfigured firewalls. They may have firewalls, but those are misconfigured, and that obviously will allow the unintended traffic flow. And in insufficient logging, they don't log, right, um, the activities, and that way you can't detect. And actually, with AI now, although there could be number of logs data produced, but with AI, you can actually filter that data and find out exactly where are the anomalies, in access and so on in your logs. Okay. Supply chain and another one, right? And social engineering, phishing, we talked about that, right? There are, and this is another one, watering hole attacks, okay, which is compromising websites frequented by utility staff. Okay, that's how, they know utility staff is visiting, say, particular site. It could be, say, IEEE, right? Because we know that we are going there. So through that site, they can actually try to get information or pretend to be IEEE website. So then it's a phishing expedition for them, right? So those are again, right? So let's move on. So how do you build a secure foundation? That's module 3 I wanted to talk about. Okay. So again, we talked about this being a culture. Okay. Technology is there, but beyond that, it's more a culture, and you need to have practices, cybersecurity practices, as well as proper governance and policies in your company. Okay. That's equally important in addition to the technology, right? So identity and access management. Who gets access to what, and how do you identify that particular individual, right? So that type of system, and then physical security. I think utilities are pretty good in that. That physical security, they have some in place, and awareness and training is another one. Okay, so let's just move on. So this is another one. Sometimes they don't even know their assets, right? They don't have hardware inventory. How many IEDs have they have? What is their model? What is the firmware, right? What workstations? What network switches, routers? What communication media? Until unless you know your devices, how you are going to secure that. Okay. Similarly for software and network itself, right? What tunes? What are the configuration baselines, right? So, so you can't protect what you don't know. So that's another area, having a comprehensive inventory, okay? And we talked about this, robust identification and access management, okay? So multi-factor authentication for remote access, that's the basic thing to do these days, right? And unique user accounts, no shared credentials, right? And also we talked about removing somebody who has left the company, removing their access, okay? Strong password policies, and also rotating. So those are, again, these things, sound very mundane, but defense in depth. This is really, you have to do all these things, right? Um, and then we talked about the role-based access, right? Who gets access to, but depending on their role, right? Um, Timeout for inactive sessions. That's, you know, don't, don't, if somebody logs in, don't keep them logged in for all the time, right? Banks do that, right? After some time, they'll kick you out, right? So, and then obviously through the logs, regular periodically verify access rights are still, that's what I was talking about. When the employee leaves, they still have access. So you have to, this is the physical security. We talked about that, card readers, biometric scanners, and so on, right? Um, Awareness and training, okay? Configuration management. But let's talk about, I think what I want to do is, yeah, network security. Segmentation was the one I wanted to focus on, okay? So this is the focus. Again, we are more concentrating on technology here in this course. So all those things are important, okay? You will get a copy of that, right? So those are, again, policies and governance and are important. But from technology point of view, we will talk about network segmentation and segregation rather than having a flat architecture, create segments so that, if attacker gets access to one portion of your network, they are not able to get into the other areas, right? If you have proper set. And then firewalls and intrusion detection system, okay? Remote access using TLS, for example, right? Secure encryption of data in transit and wireless security, okay? So let's talk about the segmentation. I call it divide and conquer, right? So the principle is to isolate critical systems and limit lateral movement for attackers. That's really what we want, and it's a very simple principle. So what we will do is we are going to create zones depending upon their security requirements. So let's say your circuit breaker zone, your circuit breakers, merging units, and IEDs, they could be one zone because they are very, very important from security point of view. Okay. Whereas if you have a workstation in an office, in an enterprise office, they are not at the same security level as your ID and circuit breakers. Okay. So you basically divide them into zones. You can have a protection ID zone, you can have a SCADA HMI zone, you can have a bay level zone or a station bus zone, you can have enterprise level zone. So depending on the security level, you're going to divide them into various zones. I'll give you a bunch of examples, okay? And then you are going to create conduits between those zones, okay? Those conduits are basically controlled communication path between zones, which will be enforced by the firewalls, okay? So those conduits will be there. And then you want to segregate IT and OT, okay? IT and OT is strict segregation between your corporate IT network and your substation or power system network, right? And often via demilitarized zone, okay? You're going to say, this is the demilitarized zone. There is no access to, certain group of people or certain enterprise area, right? And setting up virtual LANs, okay? Physical separation of local area network is better, but sometimes it may not be always possible. Now you can set up the virtual LANs, okay? Even everything can be on the same local area network, right? But within that, you can set up virtual LANs. It's better than no segregation, right? So those virtual LANs. So you can, for example, create a separate virtual LAN for all protection relays with firewall rules, only allowing specific goose messages from designated peers. You can say, firewall, you can set up the rules, right? Who gets through or who doesn't get through that, right? So that's um, So this is again an example of utility automation zones and trust levels. So this is, you have to decide within your system what zones you want. Okay. So for example, depending on the trust level. So this is obviously the public internet zone, the least trusted zone. You don't trust that zone at all. Okay. And then obviously you will go through a router or a firewall, right? And then you have your own enterprise zone, your own company's enterprise, offices and stuff like that. You know, it's a little bit more trusted than the internet, but still not trusted. Okay. And then you have your SCADA, control system zone, okay, which is basically, demilitarized zone, right? And then the bottom one, the most critical is your substation zone, right? So here you need very high security, or you can trust it because you are the only one who have access to it. But still, you need high security here. This is the least trusted zone. Okay. So this is another example, and this is from your IC 62443 standard. Okay. Although we didn't discuss it in detail, but this is the most important aspect from that particular standard. Okay. Uh, Dividing, setting up zones and conduits. So this, for example, is the enterprise network. Okay. Which, within that you could have their own wide area, e-commerce, billing and stuff like that. They can be connected to the internet through their own firewall. Okay, they have web server. And then we have this one is our DMG, right? This could be our SCADA, for example. Okay, and you can be connected to the enterprise through a conduit, okay, which will be highly controlled. Okay, either firewall, you will set up the rules, who gets into this area, right? Right. And in this area, you could have, you know, um, any type of system, basically. This is general example. We will go to the transmission level and distribution level and also DER level. I'll show you a few examples of those. And then you could have, various networks at the bottom, and again connected to, this could be your substation network. And within the substation network, you could have either virtual LANs or even further subdivided, okay, into that. So again, depending upon how you want to set it up. So this is zones and conduits as per IEC 62443, okay. So this is using the LAN, right? Or you can segment it, right? So this is again one LAN, this is another LAN, right? So different zones, and you are going to go through a switch which could have a firewall, right? So you could set up. So these are like physical segmentation you have, right? You could do the same thing with virtual LANs. Although you could be connected to even one single LAN, but logically, for example, this area, although they are on two different local area networks, but logically they are within one virtual LAN. Okay, same thing here, within one virtual LAN, and you can divide that, right? And this is the modern concept that they have, which is network segmentation using data concentrator. Okay, you could use the data concentrator where you could control the data, basically, which way direction it will flow, depending upon where it's coming from and who have access. Okay, so in previously what we did was we set up this virtual LAN. So that means all these devices are on this particular LAN. Okay, you could do the same thing by using the data concentrator. Okay, rather than using the virtual LAN. So this is actually a modern concept that they are trying to use. Okay, so obviously now, your data concentrator has, when it's connected to, say, low trust area, they have to go through the firewall. Okay, and all the devices are connected to the data concentrator, and you could have, for example, this device and this device as one zone. Okay, and data concentrator will make sure that these two devices are the ones who can share information. For example, any information coming from this device will not go here, right? So that's again the purpose for the data concentrator. That's um, I think this is a little bit more on the firewalls, okay, in automated substations. So you could do internal segmentation firewalls between different areas within different zones. Okay, um, and this is what the rule is. Default is to deny. You know, that's the default thing. Some people who always say no. That's what it is. It's a good thing. Okay, so default is to deny, and then you verify after that. Okay, so obviously they have to have very high availability. Okay, sometimes you have to use a redundant firewall. Okay, because your firewall cannot be down, because that's the one who is going to regulate the traffic and the data, right? So, and this is the IDS. As I said, if we get time, we will work on that. Okay, this is the intrusion detection system, okay, which continuously monitors the traffic. Okay, and it could be patterns. They look at the traffic patterns to see if somebody is attacking, or it could be rule based. If, for example, somebody is trying to crack the password of an ID, obviously they're going to have access to that ID continuously and multiple times, right? So, so this IDS, you could have network based, so one central, for the whole network, or you can have a host based. Right now IDs don't have that capability. So majority of the time it's network based IDS. Okay, and then controlling the remote access. Okay, so that again using the BPMs. Okay, multi-factor authentication and encryption and so on, right? So those are again some of the solutions. Okay, this is, I think, some of these technologies we have already talked about. Okay, I will try to demonstrate BPN. Okay, so then we will talk about the IPsec. This is again security at different layers, right? So this is usually used for creating the secure VPN tunnels, IPsec, right? Um, and for SCADA communication, there is DNP3 and DNP-SA, which is with encryption, or you can use DNP3 over TLS. So all these technologies, I think we are aware now, right? So we could use that. This is more on wireless links in substations. Okay, and usually you use temporary maintenance access or sensor networks. So I'm not sure in utilities how much wireless networks are there. Okay, not the same level as the wired network, obviously, right? So they have their own encryption. Okay, the standards like WPA3 and then WPA2 encryption with AES, which is through the symmetric cryptography, okay, and so on, right? So this is again an area that need to be looked at. So I think I have enough time to talk about data diodes. Okay, so what are the data diodes? Data diodes are basically hardware devices that enforce one-way data flow. Okay. For example, OT to IT. IT cannot come back to the OT side. Okay. So it's really provides a physical separation between transmit and receive pass. Okay. So guaranteed data in one flow. There are advantages and disadvantages of it. Okay. But from security point of view, you have to be, um, you know, you have to see whether this is something, for example, a data diode, PMU data to be streamed from substation OT to central historian or corporate network, not the other way around, right? So those are again data diodes. While we are here, I'm going to skip this one. So how do I get out of here? Want to go to another. So we will talk about data diodes because we have 15, 20 minutes, and we will come back from here to this one. Yeah. Okay. So this I call unconventional cybersecurity. Okay, it's not in the conventional set, but let's talk about data diodes in substation SCADA control. Okay, so this is really one-way data flow, and it enables the control. Actually, if somebody doesn't have a very sophisticated cybersecurity like public key infrastructure and digital signatures and all this, this probably is one of the easiest way to at least set up some cybersecurity, especially in the SCADA system. Okay, so the whole idea is to enforce physical one-way flow from the substation to SCADA. And also we will talk about some limited from SCADA to substation for control purpose. Okay, you can control. So it basically prevents remote cyber attacks from entering your OT network. Okay, and the main drawback is, I think this is not really true. SCADA can't send control commands. I'll show you there is a way for them to send control command, but it's limited. Okay, so this is the architecture. So substation to data diode to SCADA. That's it. That's one-way flow. So telemetry flows out, no command back, right? And the use case is where you want only read-only monitoring. Okay, maybe this could be used, for example, in DERs, where the utility just wants how much power DER is producing, right? So you don't want to control the DER, right? So this is again, so it's pure diode monitoring only. So data flows only in one direction, right? So this is one. So this is another one where data flows in one direction, but through secure VPN, SCADA can interact with substation in a limited way. Okay, you could have, but it does provide the physical separation between telemetry and control network, right? So, obviously there is through secure VPN, you have some authentication and, so it's a secure bidirectional functionality, something, and you could limit what SCADA can do in the substation. You could limit that also. And the third one is preloaded command queue, okay? Because there could be some substations where you basically know that there are only 10 things I am going to do, okay? And you could preload those, right? So SCADA sends curated command list via diode, okay, right? And substation selects actions, right? So substation will contain those preloaded groups. A, B, C, whatever, you can set that up yourself, right? So, and benefit is it's minimal pre-approved commands. That's again, so again, depending on what and how you want to set it up, this is probably one of the easiest way to provide some level of cybersecurity in this case. And then we have a reverse diode, okay, which I call filtered control path. So we have the telemetry diode where data flows in one direction, okay? So SCADA to control diode to filter appliance to substation, and then substation to telemetry diode to SCADA, right? That. And the other one is SCADA to control diode, and then you filter those commands and take action, okay? So, so it's a limited control path with filtering. You could have human in loop verification. For example, if SCADA is sending the command before the action is taken, it could be an SMS to a operator. Is this the, or to your control center or whatever, is this the action you want to take? Is this legitimate? Or then you approve that action and that's when it's taken. So it's really a selective control, okay? And the last one in this one is we have the out of band human control, okay? So SCADA to data diodes. So SCADA notification goes to the field tech and they take the action, okay? Operator has to come. So it's not meant for really remote controlled substations, okay? So operator has to actually physical go. And this is obviously zero remote control risk, okay? And pure monitoring in cyber rail, okay? So those are again data diodes, what we call, okay? There are various levels as we saw, okay? So depending on your, so obviously field technician has to go in and do it manually, any commands, right? So dual diode hardware, so it enforces protocol whitelist, right? For example, we didn't talk about 6870-5-104. I don't think we have talked about that. I have the presentation, but unfortunately, we probably will not get time. And this is the SCADA protocol, right? And it actually does NERC SIP compliance. So this is the North American. So even that one, these data diodes will make you compliant with some of these regulations, right? So this is for European utility, okay? They do the dual network separation, right? We have the two levels, telemetries and control is separate now, right? And diode for SCADA and then BPN for control. So they meet the regulation of European utility. I am not again sure about the Indian regulations. Maybe by using one of these setups, you could meet that regulation also, right? So what are the pros and cons? Okay, what are the comparison of, we talked about 4 or 5 different architectures possible for data diodes. Pure diode, simple, secure, but no control, right? It's just telemetry going in one direction. Dual network, it's secure, bidirectional, but obviously costly. You have to set up the VPN now, right? Which we will hopefully get to talk about later, okay? And then there are preloaded queues that we talked about. Preloaded commands are there. So it's secure, but limited flexibility. Only the preloaded commands will be allowed, okay? And then we have the reverse diode we talked about. Its selective control setup is complex in that case, right? The reverse diode. And the out of band is the one where the operator has to go. right? And it's the highest security, and it probably can't be done for every substation, okay? Because there will be operational delay because the operator has to actually physically go or has to be there in the substation, right? I did not talk about the software-defined networks, okay? Because I'm not sure how much concept you have of software-defined networks. Do you know what are software-defined networks? Okay, let's forget about it then. We are not going to talk because that by itself, it will take me a while for me to explain what is software-defined networks. So in a nutshell, software-defined networks are where rather than the switches and routers routing the information, what you do is you have actually software doing that job, and you can configure that software on the fly. You can change it, okay? So those are software-defined networks. And, okay, so this is again a little bit of what you can do. Pure diode plus human out of band for critical sites, the sites that are very critical. You want then the human operator to go and take action, okay? But if you want a balanced security, balanced in the sense that you want some remote control and so on, you can use the BPN. So it's a dual network where telemetry is through diode, and then you go through the BPN for control actions, right? And then you use the reverse diode for limited automation only, right? And preloaded queues, where you are very sure that it's only these 5 actions you are going to take. So you can preload those. So your environment is very predictive in that case, right? You know that I just need to take only these 5 actions. That's it, nothing more than that. And this is again, software-defined networks are for future adoption. It's not now, okay? This is more research and, for the future direction. That's why I decided not to talk about it here, okay? So that's it for data diodes. So I think any questions? We are going to continue with the presentation, okay? And then what we will do is tomorrow, whenever I'm doing, we will start with various architectures and show you how to set up the zones and conduits, okay? Um, I have 10 examples actually. So it will take us a while, different, scenarios, okay? Because I think this zoning and segmentation is actually very important beyond the technology, because you can set this up using VPNs and firewalls, which, majority of the people know how to do, and you don't need to set up any PKI or, digital signatures and so on. So this is at least, will provide some level of security for you, okay? So we will stop here, and any questions? Yeah.